For a long time, we thought we knew the past. We believed history was written in stone, static, unchanging. But it turns out we were just missing the right pair of glasses. We've spent centuries staring at the same artifacts. We looked at white marble statues and thought the Greeks loved minimalism. We looked at dense green jungles and saw nothing but empty space. We found charred, black lumps of coal in ancient ruins and tossed them aside as trash. We looked at the surface and we missed the soul. We labeled these things as mysteries because we simply didn't have the tools to understand them. But that's changing right now. We are living in a new era. We aren't just digging with shovels and brushes anymore. Today, we're digging with code. We're using lasers to see through solid earth and dense forest canopies. We're using superpowered X-rays to read scrolls that haven't been opened in 2 millennia. We're using artificial intelligence to reconstruct voices that have been silent for 10,000 years. It's like we've finally turned the lights on in a dark room. We are literally peeling back the curtain of time. It's not just archaeology anymore. It's a high-tech forensic investigation into who we used to be. In this video, we're exploring 10 incredible moments where the impossible became real. We'll look at a 2,000-year-old computer found in a shipwreck. We'll uncover a massive, ancient New York hidden under the roots of a tropical jungle. We're going to find out why a legendary city literally turned into a water slide and vanished into the sea. And we'll see a clock the size of a mountain that still keeps perfect time after 23 centuries. The truth is, the past isn't silent. It's just been waiting for us to get better at listening. These aren't just mysteries anymore. They are solutions. They are stories rewritten by the light of modern technology. Welcome to the golden age of discovery. Let's peel back the first layer. Mystery 10. The Antikythera mechanism picture. A group of sponge divers in the year 1901, they're working off the coast of a tiny Greek island called Antikythera. They find a Roman shipwreck. It's filled with treasures. Bronze statues, fine jewelry, marble. But among the gold and the art, there's a lump of green, corroded bronze. It's about the size of a shoebox. At the time, nobody gave it much thought. It looked like a rock. It sat in a museum basement for decades, but as it dried out, it cracked open. And inside, people saw gears, tiny, interlocking, precision-cut bronze teeth. Archaeologists were baffled. This wreck was from the 1st century BC. According to everything we knew about history, complex gear systems like this shouldn't have existed for another 150 years. It was like finding a smartphone in the tomb of a Roman gladiator. It didn't belong in its own time. For a century, it stayed a mystery. We couldn't open it without destroying it. Then came the breakthrough. Scientists used high-resolution 3D X-ray imaging. They basically gave this rock a CT scan. They sliced through the corrosion digitally, and what they saw was breathtaking. Inside that lump were over 30 sophisticated gears. They found thousands of tiny Greek characters engraved on the plates. It wasn't just a machine, it was a manual. This is the Antikythera mechanism. It is the world's first analog computer. It wasn't for telling the time of day, it was for telling the time of the universe. By turning a small crank, a user could track the cycles of the sun and the moon. It predicted eclipses with down-to-the-hour accuracy. It even tracked the complex wandering paths of the 5 planets known to the Greeks. It even had a dial to count down the years to the next Olympic Games. Think about the level of math required to build this. Think about the engineering. This device proves that the ancient world was far more technologically advanced than we ever dared to imagine. It wasn't just art and philosophy, it was hardware. We used to think the Dark Ages happened because the knowledge wasn't there. But the Antikythera mechanism shows us that the knowledge was there. We just lost the thread. Mystery number 9, the Maya superhighways. For decades, we looked at the Maya civilization and saw a mystery of survival. How did millions of people live in the middle of a dense, hostile jungle? We saw great cities like Tikal or Mirador, but they looked like islands in a sea of green. We assumed they were isolated pockets of life, separated by miles of impenetrable forest. Then we took to the skies with a technology called LIDAR. Think of LIDAR as a laser-powered X-ray for the Earth. A plane flies over the canopy and fires billions of laser pulses at the ground. These lasers slip through the tiny gaps between leaves and branches, bounce off the forest floor, and return to a sensor. When you strip away the digital noise of the trees, the jungle floor is revealed in high definition. What we saw changed Mayan history overnight. The jungle wasn't empty. It was a grid. Hidden beneath the roots and soil was a massive 650-square-mile network of stone highways. We call them sakbiob. These weren't just dirt paths, they were elevated stone roads, some over 100 feet wide and dozens of miles long. The reveal was staggering. The Maya weren't living in isolated city-states. They were part of a hyper-connected ancient New York. They had massive farms, intricate irrigation canals, and defensive walls that stretched for miles. All of it was hidden in plain sight. These highways were the veins of an empire. They allowed for massive trade, troop movements, and communication on a scale we thought was impossible for the time. They even used these roads as a sort of stone GPS system, aligning them with the stars to navigate the dense forest. We used to think the Maya were a collection of jungle tribes. Now we know they were a sprawling, industrial powerhouse. We didn't find a new city, we found a new way of seeing how humans can conquer the most difficult terrain on Earth. The empty jungle was actually one of the most densely populated places in the ancient world. Mystery the state Thonis Heraclean, the Egyptian Atlantis. Before the rise of Alexandria, there was a city that served as the gateway to Egypt. It was called Thonis by the Egyptians and Heraclean by the Greeks. It was a place of immense wealth, a hub of international trade, a city of massive temples and towering statues. And then it vanished. For 2,700 years, Thonis Heraclean existed only in ancient texts. It was a legend, a ghost story. Most historians began to think it never existed at all. They thought it was just a myth, like Atlantis. But in the year 2000, a team of underwater archaeologists led by Frank Goddio started scanning the seafloor in the Bay of Abukir. They weren't just diving blindly, they were using sophisticated sonar mapping and nuclear magnetic resonance technology to look beneath the sediment of the Mediterranean. What they found was a city frozen in time. Under the sand and mud, they found hundreds of shipwrecks. They found gold coins and jewelry, but most impressively, they found the architecture of a superpower, giant columns, massive granite slabs, and statues, huge, perfectly preserved statues. The biggest question wasn't where it was, but how it got there. How does a massive stone city just sink into the ocean? The answer came from the soil itself. The city was built on a delta where the ground was made of loose clay and silt. Scientists realized that a series of natural disasters, likely a combination of massive earthquakes and tidal waves, struck the city. The weight of those heavy stone buildings, combined with the shaking of the earth, caused a phenomenon called soil liquefaction. The ground literally turned into a liquid. The city didn't just flood, it slid. It moved like a giant, tragic water slide, slipping off the edge of the coast and plunging into the Mediterranean. One of the most haunting finds was a 16-foot-tall statue of Hapi. He was the god of the Nile flood. He was supposed to be the protector of the waters. Finding him standing upright on the dark, silent seafloor was a chilling reminder of the city's final moments. Thonis Heracleon wasn't a myth, it was a warning. It shows us that even the most powerful civilizations are ultimately at the mercy of the ground beneath their feet. Mystery number 7, the neon world of ancient Greece. When you walk through the halls of a world-class museum, the ancient Greek section always feels very quiet. You see row after row of serene white marble statues, pale gods, colorless heroes. For centuries, this clean look defined our idea of Western beauty. We thought the Greeks were minimalists who valued the purity of the stone. We were dead wrong. In reality, an ancient Greek city would have looked less like a quiet museum and more like Times Square. It was a riot of color. It was loud. It was electric. So, how did we miss it? The answer is simple. Time. Over thousands of years, the pigments used to paint these statues, made from minerals and organic dyes, flaked off or faded away. To the naked eye, the statues looked white, but the ghosts of those colors never left. Today, researchers are using UV lights and electron microscopes to find them. When you hit an ancient statue with high-intensity ultraviolet light, the fingerprints of the original paint glow. Even if the pigment is gone, the way the paint protected the stone from weathering leaves a pattern. The results are shocking. Those serious marble figures were actually wearing bright red tunics. Their shields were covered in intricate gold leaf. They had patterned leggings in vibrant yellows and deep greens. They even used a pigment called Egyptian blue that actually glows under certain infrared lights. Imagine a statue of Zeus. In our heads, he's a towering figure of white stone. But to an ancient Greek, Zeus looked like he just stepped out of a pride parade. He was wearing neon blues and reds, with golden hair and tan skin. The Parthenon wasn't a white temple. It was a multicolored masterpiece that could be seen from miles away. This discovery changes everything about how we see the rational Greeks. They weren't cold and clinical. They loved spectacle. They loved flash. By looking closer, down to the level of the molecule, we've realized that the classic white aesthetic was an accident of history. We've been living in a black and white movie and science just turned on the Technicolor. Mystery 6. The poisoned wells of Tikal. The Maya were masters of the jungle. They built towering pyramids and sophisticated cities that lasted for over 1,000 years, but then, at the height of their power, they simply left. Around the 9th century, the great city of Tikal was abandoned. For a long time, we blamed drought or warfare or total societal collapse. But recent science has found a much darker, much more specific culprit. The Maya were being poisoned by their own obsession with beauty. Researchers recently took core samples from the bottom of the ancient reservoirs in Tikal. These were the giant stone basins that held the city's drinking water. Using geochemical analysis, they looked at the layers of sediment that had settled over centuries. What they found was terrifying. The sediment was loaded with mercury. In some areas, the levels of mercury were so high they would be considered toxic, even by modern safety standards. But where did it come from? It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a choice. The Maya loved the color red. They used a mineral called cinnabar to paint their buildings, their pottery, and even their own bodies. Cinnabar is beautiful. It's a deep, rich crimson. But cinnabar is also mercury sulfide. Every time it rained, the tropical downpours washed the red paint off the pyramids and into the city's reservoirs. Over decades, the mercury seeped into the water supply. The very thing that made their city look like a paradise was turning their drinking water into a slow-acting poison. It gets worse. The scientists also found toxic algae blooms in the water. Because the Maya didn't have a modern sewage system, the runoff from their kitchens and homes fed these dead zones in the reservoirs. Imagine living in Tikal during its final days. You're surrounded by magnificent red-painted monuments, but the water you're drinking is a chemical cocktail. It would have caused tremors, organ failure, and madness. Tikal wasn't just abandoned because of a lack of rain. It was a man-made environmental disaster. It was essentially a nuclear waste dump inside a tropical paradise. The Maya didn't just lose their empire, they accidentally poisoned the very wells that kept them alive. Mystery. 5. The secret formula of Egyptian ink. We've all seen them in museums. Ancient Egyptian papyrus scrolls, some of them 3,000 years old. What's amazing isn't just that the paper survived, it's that the writing is still there. The black and red text looks like it was written yesterday. It's crisp, it hasn't faded, it hasn't blurred. For a long time, we just assumed they used high-quality charcoal. But if you've ever tried to keep a charcoal drawing perfect for 3 millenniums, you know it doesn't work that way. Usually, ink sits on top of the fibers. Over time, it flakes off or gets washed away. So, how did the Egyptians make their words permanent? To find out, scientists took fragments of these scrolls to a synchrotron. This is a massive particle accelerator that uses X-rays 100 billion times brighter than the ones in a doctor's office. They weren't just looking at the ink, they were looking at the atoms inside the ink. The reveal was a masterclass in ancient chemistry. The Egyptians weren't just using pigment and water, they were adding lead. Specifically, they were using lead as a dryer. When you paint with oil today, you might use a drying agent to make sure the paint sets quickly. The Egyptians figured this out thousands of years ago. By adding specific lead salts to their ink, they created a chemical reaction. Instead of the ink just sitting on top of the papyrus, the lead acted like a weight. It pulled the pigment deep into the fibers of the plant material and locked it there. It was essentially the invention of the permanent marker. They were using advanced chemical engineering to ensure their records survived for eternity. They had black ink for the main text and red ink for headings and important dates. Both were engineered with this lead-based technology. Think about the confidence that takes. They weren't just writing for their neighbors, they were writing for us. They were using science we are only just now beginning to understand to make sure their story never faded. Thousands of years before the Sharpie, the Egyptians had already solved the problem of permanence. Mystery number 4, the Shigir idol, the wooden pickle. In 1890, gold miners in a Russian bog pulled something strange from the mud. It was a massive 17-foot-tall pillar of larch wood. It was covered in mysterious carved geometric patterns and human-like faces. Because the peat bog was acidic and lacked oxygen, it acted like a preservative. The wood didn't rot, it just sat there for thousands of years, becoming what archaeologists nicknamed the wooden pickle. For over a century, the Shigir idol was a curiosity. Experts thought it was maybe 3,000 years old. They figured it was made by some local tribe around the same time as the Iron Age. Then came the modern lab tests. In the late 1990s, and again more recently using advanced accelerator mass spectrometry, scientists dated the wood. The results sent shockwaves through the scientific community. This wasn't 3,000 years old, it was 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, this wooden statue is double the age of the Great Pyramids of Giza. It was carved at the end of the last ice age, when mammoths were still roaming the earth. But it's not just the age that's mind-blowing, it's the detail. Microscopic analysis shows the entire 17-foot structure was carved using the lower jaws of beavers. The ancient artists used the sharp, chisel-like teeth of the animal to scrape and shape the hard larchwood into a complex totem pole. The idol has 8 distinct faces carved into its surface. It looks like a coded message from a world we don't recognize. We used to think that complex art, sculptures on this scale with symbolic meaning, only appeared when humans settled down into farming villages. The Shigir idol proves that primitive hunter-gatherers were already master artists and deep thinkers. They were building monuments to their gods or their ancestors, while the rest of the world was still living in caves. This wooden pickle isn't just a piece of old timber, it's a time capsule. It tells us that our ancestors were far more sophisticated, spiritual, and skilled than we ever gave them credit for. Mystery. Chapter 3: The Sunken Wood, Circles of Europe. For years, divers and fishermen in the lakes of Switzerland and Germany reported something strange. Deep on the muddy lake floors, they saw perfect circles made of timber. These weren't just fallen logs, they were massive, upright posts, driven deep into the silt, forming symmetrical rings. Initially, historians were confused. Why would anyone build a massive wooden structure at the bottom of a lake? It didn't make sense. Some thought they were fish traps, others thought they were the remains of ancient piers. But then, we used a science called dendrochronology or tree ring dating. When you look at the cross-section of a tree, the rings tell a story. They tell you exactly what the weather was like every single year that tree was alive. By comparing the rings in these sunken posts to a master database of ancient climate data, scientists didn't just get an approximate age, they got the exact year these trees were cut down. The results revealed a hidden world. These structures weren't built underwater, they were built 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, during a period when the climate was much drier. These were Stonehenge-style ritual sites and massive community platforms built on dry land or right at the edge of the shore. As the climate changed and water levels rose, these magnificent structures were swallowed by the lakes. But the water actually did us a favor. It acted as a vacuum seal. Because there was no oxygen at the bottom of the lake, the wood didn't rot. When archaeologists used underwater joinery analysis, looking at how the wood was cut and fitted, they found something incredible. These wasn't just primitive construction. They used complex mortise and tenon joints, the same kind high-end furniture makers use today. They found massive platforms the size of football fields that once held entire villages. It turns out Europe was once a landscape of lake dwellers. These sunken circles were the spiritual and social hearts of their world. We only found them because we stopped looking at the ground and started looking under the waves. It's a reminder that the map of our world is constantly shifting, and some of our greatest monuments are currently resting in the deep. Mystery. 2. The burnt scrolls of Herculaneum. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it didn't just destroy Pompeii, it buried the nearby town of Herculaneum under 80 feet of volcanic ash. In the ruins of one massive villa, archaeologists found something incredible, a library, over 1,000 scrolls. But there was a problem. The heat from the volcano didn't burn them to ash, it carbonized them. It turned them into solid cylinders of charcoal. They looked like burnt logs or overcooked sausages. For 250 years they sat in a museum. If you try to unroll them, they shatter into 1,000,000 tiny flakes. If you touch them, the words vanish forever. They were considered a lost library, a treasure chest we could see but never open. Until now. A team of researchers launched what they called the Vesuvius Challenge. They used high-resolution CT scans, the same technology used in hospitals, to create a 3D digital map of the scroll's insides. But even then, you couldn't see the writing. The ink was made of carbon, and the scrolls were made of carbon. To an X-ray, it was like trying to read a black marker on black paper. The solution? Artificial intelligence. They trained an AI to recognize the tiniest, most microscopic changes in the texture of the papyrus, the crackle where the ink had dried and slightly warped the surface. In 2023 and 2024, the breakthrough finally happened. the AI began to virtually unwrap the layers. For the first time in 2,000 years, we are reading the words of a Roman aristocrat. We've discovered lost works of Epicurean philosophy, including a text about the pleasures of life, like food and music. This isn't just about one book. This villa is believed to have belonged to the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. There could be lost histories by Livy or poems by Sappho hidden in those charcoal lumps. We are literally downloading the library of the ancient world. We're using silicon chips to resurrect thoughts that were silenced by a volcano 2 millennia ago. Mystery. 1 Tranquillo, the cosmic rainbow clock. High on a barren ridge in the coastal desert of Peru, there is a monument that looks like the spine of a giant beast. It's a line of 13 stone towers, spaced perfectly apart, stretching along the horizon. For centuries, these towers were a total enigma. Local legends didn't mention them. No written records existed. They were just there, silent, watching the sky. Archaeologists called the site Tranquillo. They knew it was old, over 2,300 years old, but they couldn't figure out why a civilization would put so much effort into building 13 identical blocks on a remote ridge. Was it a fort, a temple, a graveyard? The answer didn't come from digging in the dirt. It came from standing still and watching the sun. By using long-term solar observation and precision astronomical mapping, researchers realized that these towers weren't just buildings. They were the teeth of a massive gear. Tranquillo is the oldest solar observatory in the Americas. Here's how it works. If you stand at a specific observation point nearby, the 13 towers perfectly span the points where the sun rises and sets throughout the entire year. On the summer solstice, the sun rises over the tower on the far left. On the winter solstice, it rises over the tower on the far right. Every day in between, the sun pops up in the gaps between the towers like a cosmic ticking clock. It is so accurate that even today, 23 centuries later, you can look at the towers and know the date within 2 or 3 days. But here's the most incredible part. We don't even have a name for the people who built it. They lived and died long before the Inca Empire. They had no written language that we've found, yet they had a mathematical understanding of the cosmos that allowed them to turn a mountain ridge into a precision instrument. They didn't just tell time, they captured it. They built a clock the size of a horizon. Tranquillo proves that prehistoric doesn't mean primitive. These people were master astronomers. They were living their lives in sync with the rhythm of the universe. It's a reminder that while our technology changes, our obsession with the stars and our need to find our place among them is as old as humanity itself. We've just traveled through thousands of years, from the depths of the Mediterranean to the high ridges of the Andes, and if there's one thing these 10 mysteries teach us, it's this: we are only just beginning to understand our own story. For a long time, we thought history was a closed book. We thought the earth had given up all its secrets. But we were wrong. We are living in the true golden age of discovery. We aren't just digging with shovels and brushes anymore. We're digging with code. We're digging with light. We're using technology to see the invisible layers of our past. We're turning charcoal back into literature and mud back into masterpieces. The big takeaway here is simple. History isn't dead. It isn't even past. It's just been waiting. It's been waiting for us to develop the right tools, the right science, and the right perspective to finally listen. The past is speaking, and for the first time in human history, we can actually hear what it's saying. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden layers of our world, make sure to subscribe. There is so much more left to find. Thanks for watching.